All right, so let's dive into something I think we all deal with on like a daily basis.
Yeah.
Those never-ending road construction projects.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the ones where you just see those orange cones stretching as far as I can see, and you think, oh, great, this is going to add another 20 minutes to my commute.
Excellent.
And it just, like, always feels so excessive, right?
Right.
Like, do we really need all of this just to, fix a pothole or whatever?
Totally agree.
And that's actually what today's deep dive is all about.
Okay, cool.
We're going to be looking at this article called The Self-Feeding Organism.
Okay.
It's by Dave Tilton, and he really digs into why this seems to be happening so much in New Zealand.
Interesting.
And, of course, the big question is, does this also apply to Australia?
Yeah, for sure. That's what we want to find out, right?
Exactly.
So what's so interesting about this article is that it's not just like a rant about traffic cones.
Right.
It actually like tries to analyze why this whole temporary traffic management system, or TTM, as they call it,
Yep.
you know why it seems to have gone a bit off the rails?
Yeah.
And the best part is this guy, Dave Tilton, he actually knows what he's talking about.
Okay.
He was part of the temporary traffic management industry steering group in New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
So he's not just some outsider complaining,
He's been in the trenches.
Exactly.
So he published this article pretty recently, actually, just on December 10th of this year.
Oh, wow. So it's very up to date.
Yeah, it's super recent. And he starts off by painting this picture, which I think we can all relate to,
Yeah.
You're already running late for work or to pick up the kids or something, and then bam,
Hit those cones.
you're stuck in a TTM zone that just seems to go on forever.
I know that feeling.
And his main argument is that this whole TTM thing, it's basically become its own industry. But instead of being focused on keeping people safe like it should be, it's more about just like growing and making more money.
So it's almost like they're incentivized to create more work for themselves.
Exactly.
That's a very interesting point.
And what makes it even more interesting is that New Zealand actually tried to fix this problem a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back in 2022, they completely revamped their TTM guidelines.
Okay.
They want to move away from this really strict rule-based system
Yeah.
and encourage people to take more of a risk-based approach.
So basically use some common sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if there's not actually a risk, why do we need all these cones?
Right.
But according to the article, things haven't really improved all that much.
Really?
In fact, it seems like TTM-related accidents are actually on the rise.
Oh, wow. So it's actually getting worse.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, more cones, more signs, more accidents. Just doesn't seem to add up.
I know, right? It's like counterintuitive.
It is.
And the article actually cites some statistics that show these TTM-related accidents are increasing faster
Okay.
than just general car crashes.
So it's not just a coincidence.
No, definitely not.
Wow. So it sounds like New Zealand has a real problem on their hands.
They do, and it's not just drivers who are frustrated about it either.
Really?
The article mentions how even the mayor of Auckland,
Uh-huh.
he's been super vocal about what he calls road cone waste.
Road cone waste. I love that.
And a lot of national policymakers are on board with this as well.
So it's not just like a fringe issue.
No, it's definitely gaining traction.
Interesting.
And there's even an official report that was done by Ernst & Young on this whole thing.
Wow, Ernst & Young. Okay, so they're taking this seriously.
Yeah, it's clearly a major issue in New Zealand, but the question is,
Are we going to be dealing with the same thing here?
exactly, are we seeing the same patterns here in Australia?
That's what we got to figure out.
Yep. But before we jump across the ditch and start comparing, I think it's helpful to unpack some of the key points from the article.
Okay, sounds good.
And one that really stuck with me was this idea that contractors have kind of lost control over their own worksite safety.
What do you mean?
Well, they're relying more and more on these specialized TTM suppliers. And according to Tilton, these suppliers actually benefit from using more equipment.
Really?
Yeah, so the more cones they put out, the more money they make.
Oh, wow. So it's like a built-in conflict of interest.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
And the article calls this a self-feeding organism.
Okay, I like that, a self-feeding organism.
Because, more rules and regulations lead to more specialized suppliers.
Uh-huh.
And that means contractors have less expertise in-house.
So they become even more reliant on these external providers.
Exactly, and that just drives up costs.
And potentially makes things less safe, ironically.
Right, because if you're just blindly following the rules and putting out cones everywhere...
You're not actually thinking about what's the safest approach for this specific situation.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So it's not just about those annoying orange cones.
It's a much bigger issue.
It's a systemic problem where the incentives are all messed up.
Right, so if we want to get rid of this conspiracy, as the article calls it.
We need to think about how to change those incentives.
Absolutely.
So how do we do that? What's the alternative?
And that's a really a key point, right? It's not just about blaming the contractors or the TTM suppliers.
Right.
We need to look at the whole system,
The whole ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. How everyone's involved and how their roles might need to change.
Especially if we don't want to end up with the same problem here.
Exactly. Are we immune to this conspiracy in Australia?
Yeah, because it's easy to read this article and think, oh, that's New Zealand. They do things differently over there.
Yeah.
But is that really true? I mean, do we have a totally different approach to worksite safety here?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Do contractors and RCAs have a better relationship in Australia? Or are we just kidding ourselves?
I think to answer that question, we need to go beyond just anecdotes and personal experiences.
We need data.
Yeah, we need hard evidence specific to Australia.
Right, are TTM-related accidents increasing here too?
Yeah, exactly. And at what rate are they increasing?
And how do people feel about it? How frustrated are drivers?
Yeah, and what about the contractors themselves?
Right.
How do they view their role in all of this?
And I think the economic side of things is important too.
Oh, absolutely.
Which the article touches on a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, all these extra cones, all these delays, they cost money.
For sure.
Not just for the projects themselves, but for the whole economy.
Yeah, it's a ripple effect.
Exactly like the mayor of Auckland was talking about road cone waste.
Right.
Is that something we should be worried about here too?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just about inconvenience for drivers, right? And it affects project budgets and ultimately taxpayers.
And consumers.
Yeah, everyone, really.
So if there's a way to keep people safe, but also use TTM more efficiently,
yeah,
that would be a huge win.
It would. And that brings us back to this idea of shifting from just blindly following rules
to a more risk-based approach.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. What does a risk-based approach actually look like on the ground?
So instead of just having a set of rules that you apply to every situation, you actually look at each work site individually.
Okay.
You consider things like what type of road is it? What's the speed limit?
How much traffic is there?
Yeah, the time of day, even the weather conditions.
And then based on all of that, you decide how much traffic control is actually needed.
Exactly. So it's a much more tailored approach.
Okay, so instead of one size fits all,
right,
we'd have a more nuanced and specific strategy.
Yeah. Exactly.
That sounds good in theory, but it also seems a lot more complicated.
It can be, yeah.
Wouldn't that require contractors and RCAs to basically change how they do things?
It would definitely require a shift in mindset.
And maybe even some changes to the regulations.
Potentially, yeah, but I think it's worth exploring.
Because if we can move away from this fear-based approach,
or every little thing is seen as a potential hazard,
and we just throw cones at it.
Yeah. Exactly. We might actually end up with work zones that are both safer and more efficient.
That's an interesting point, because sometimes I feel the more cones there are,
the less people pay attention to them.
Yeah, exactly. It's they become invisible.
Part of the landscape.
The article mentions this briefly, how public perception plays a role.
Uh-huh.
This idea that if drivers actually respected TTM zones more,
maybe we wouldn't need so much of it.
Do you think that's a factor here in Australia too?
I think it's definitely something to think about. Maybe we need some public education campaigns.
To help people understand why TTM is important.
Exactly, and encourage them to drive more safely around work zones.
But that's not going to solve the whole problem, is it?
No, we still need to address those underlying systemic issues.
The misaligned incentives.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like we need a multi-pronged approach.
I think so.
We need to change the rules, provide training.
And raise public awareness.
But where do we even start? Who's in charge of all of this?
The article suggests that the people who are actually commissioning the roadworks, they have a lot of power to influence change.
Because they're the ones paying for it.
Exactly. They hold the purse strings, so if they start demanding risk-based approaches...
and rewarding contractors who prioritize efficiency as well as safety...
that could really send a message to the industry.
But that means the clients need to be on board with this too, right?
Absolutely. They need to understand what a risk-based approach is and why it's beneficial.
Otherwise, they're just going to stick with the old way of doing things.
Exactly. And that's why conversations like this are so important.
We need to get everyone talking about this.
Yeah, not just industry professionals, but the public as well.
Because at the end of the day, it affects all of us.
Whether we're drivers, taxpayers, or just people who use roads to get around.
So, the next time you're stuck in traffic because of roadworks,
don't just get frustrated.
Think about what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, are all these cones really necessary?
Is there a better way to do this?
And are we doing enough here in Australia to avoid falling into the same trap as New Zealand?
Those are great questions to ask.
And they really get to the heart of this whole deep dive.
Challenging the status quo, looking for better solutions.
And ultimately creating a transportation system that works better for everyone.
I think as we move into the last part of our discussion,
we could try to come up with some concrete steps that we can take here in Australia.
Yeah, to actually start moving in the right direction.
Okay, so we've kind of established that this whole conspiracy thing, it might be a problem here in Australia too.
Yeah, it's definitely something we need to keep an eye on.
But complaining about it isn't going to get us anywhere, right?
We need to be proactive.
Exactly. So what are some practical steps that we could actually take?
To address this and move towards that risk-based approach we talked about.
Yeah, like how do we make this happen?
Well, I think one concrete step would be to review our current TTM guidelines.
Yeah.
See if they're actually working.
Like, are they too rigid?
Yeah, do they encourage this one-size-fits-all approach?
And can we adapt them to support a more risk-based system?
Exactly.
But guidelines are just words on paper. Right?
That's true.
We need people to actually follow them.
So how do we change the behavior of the contractors?
The RCAs, even the drivers?
Yeah, everyone involved.
So that they actually embrace this new way of thinking.
Well, I think education and training would be key.
Okay.
We need to make sure contractors have the skills to do proper risk assessments and to design TTM plans that are actually appropriate for each specific work site.
But wouldn't that add to the cost of projects?
It could potentially, yeah.
Especially for smaller contractors who might not have a lot of resources.
That's where the RCAs can step in.
Okay.
They could offer subsidized training programs.
Okay.
Provide guidance and support to contractors who are trying to make this shift.
So instead of just punishing them for not following every single rule, we're actually helping them.
Exactly. It's about collaboration, not punishment.
I like that.
Working together to achieve the same goal.
Which is safe and efficient work zones.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the contractors either, right?
We need to involve the public as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Public awareness campaigns could really change how drivers think about TTM.
I mean, I know it's frustrating to be stuck in traffic.
And you have no idea why.
And you just start wondering if all those cones are really necessary.
Right.
But maybe if we were more transparent about it.
Yeah, if drivers understood the reasons behind the TTM.
Maybe they'd be more patient.
And more likely to respect those work zones.
Exactly.
So transparency could lead to more trust and understanding.
And ultimately make things safer for everyone.
Right. It all comes back to that cultural shift the article talked about.
Moving away from this fear-based approach.
To a more proactive, data-driven model.
So it's not just about changing rules or providing training.
It's about changing how we think about worksite safety.
Yeah, it's a bigger challenge.
But it's also a huge opportunity.
To create a transportation system that's more efficient, more effective.
And hopefully a lot less frustrating.
That's a great point to end on, I think.
The conspiracy might be real.
But it's not inevitable.
We can break free from this cycle of excessive cones and endless frustration.
If we work together.
Exactly.
So next time you find yourself stuck in traffic because of roadworks,
don't just complain about it.
Think about what we talked about today.
Ask yourself those important questions.
Is there a better way to do this?
And are we doing everything we can to make things better?
Maybe with a little effort and a lot of collaboration.
We can actually make those orange cones a little less intimidating.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of temporary traffic management.
It's been a great discussion.
We'll see you next time.